Well, let's get the Israeli view now. And joining us is Israel's Prime Minister's spokesman, David Keyes, is live from Jerusalem. Mr. Keyes, thank you so much for being on Al Jazeera. Before we talk about the Paris meeting, I want you to respond, if you can, to what Mr. Erekat just said. The Palestinians say Israel is undermining the peace process, undermining the two-state solution. What do you respond?
Quite the opposite. Israel remains committed to seeing two states for two peoples living side by side in peace. What a tragedy that President Abbas has agreed to sit with Israel's prime minister less than 7 hours in 7 years. It's very hard to have peace if you can't even sit together. When we do sit together, every single issue is on the table. And I understand people's frustration with the peace process. Both Israelis and Palestinians deserve to live in peace. And that's why it's so important to sit down together and work out all of these difficult issues, just as Israel did with Egypt, forging a peace which has lasted for decades, and having forged peace with Jordan, which also lasted for decades. All of us desire peace, and every time we've had a partner that actually was committed to it, we managed to find a way to do it together.
If Israel is committed to peace, as you say, why is Prime Minister Netanyahu so not keen about this French process? I mean, he says that the path to peace doesn't pass through international conferences. I mean, why is Israel rejecting these efforts by France, effort to set the terms of reference for future talks?
Well, imagine your own home. Imagine the home you grew up in, full of your childhood memories. If you had a dispute with your neighbor about your home, the best way to settle that wouldn't be to fly to a different continent, invite 30 people who weren't from your area, for example, to try to resolve this conflict. What we need to do is sit down together with our Palestinian neighbors at long last, because both of our peoples deserve peace.
Right.
Bilateral, direct negotiations without preconditions. This is a formula which has worked in the past, and it can work again.
But Mr. Keyes, you say it worked in the past, but it really hasn't. I mean, bringing the two sides together without changing anything on the ground isn't going to achieve anything, and this history proves it. Nothing is going to change when settlement building continues, when there's a lack of accountability for the daily violence that Palestinians experience.
Well, when Israel ceased settlement building, the Palestinians didn't come to the table. When it withdrew all settlers from Gaza, Hamas took over. When it withdrew from Lebanon, Hezbollah, a group that calls for genocide of all Jews.
The settlement expansion continues, though. I mean, you can't keep bringing up, Gaza and so on, when what we're seeing today is continued settlement expansion. It's really hard to believe that Israel is committed to this peace effort when settlement expansion continues on a daily basis.
We should be so lucky that this conflict was about apartment buildings or balconies in Jerusalem or anywhere else. But all you have to do is turn on Palestinian television, whether it's Al-Aqsa TV in Gaza or whether it's Al-Awda TV in the West Bank. And there you will find the most vile and dehumanizing rhetoric about the Jewish people and the Israeli people, and preaching that every city in Israel will eventually be Palestine. And that rhetoric, that inability to accept our very legitimate right to be here, shows what this conflict is really about. Okay. Unfortunately, it is still about the Israeli state and not a Palestinian state.
Mr. Keyes, I hear what you're saying, but the Palestinians can say the same thing. It's very difficult to have faith in this process and believe that Israel is committed to this peace process when Prime Minister Netanyahu appoints the ultranationalist Avigdor Lieberman as his defense minister, a man who said he wanted disloyal Palestinians in Israel to be beheaded.
Avigdor Lieberman's position on two states is very clear. What he actually said was he supports two states for two peoples in line with the Prime Minister's vision. That's the position of the Israeli government. That will remain the position of the Israeli government, and it's the best hope for peace. All we need is a partner on the other side who's willing to accept our very legitimacy, recognize our rights here, and accept Israel's presence in the Middle East. As soon as that happens,
if the Palestinians accept that, would Israel also accept the Palestinians' demand, and that is that settlement expansion stop, and that Israel is held accountable for the daily injustices that Palestinians face?
It wouldn't be appropriate for me to negotiate live on TV with Al Jazeera these issues. It should be negotiated between the parties in good faith. I know that the Israeli government is truly committed to peace. It's something that all Israelis want.
Okay.
This conflict has gone on for too long.
Right.
And as soon as the Palestinian leadership stops calling soccer stadiums after Dalal Mughrabi, who murdered over 30 civilians,
Mr. Keyes,
as soon as the Palestinian Facebook page of Fatah doesn't praise a mass murder, we can educate people for peace.
The Palestinians can do the same, of course, and talk about the Palestinian children who were killed and burnt and killed by Israelis. Let me just come back to the peace process. In parallel right now, the Egyptians are trying to revive the talks. Do you think Egypt is a better broker than France and the Middle East Quartet?
Well, definitely. I mean, for one, it's in the region. It has a better sense of the difficult issues that we need to work out. There's a real possibility for normalization with many countries in this region. And that kind of framework makes a lot more sense than people flying in from all four corners of the world, people who haven't really lived here, who haven't felt the pain of this region, who don't send their children to the army to defend their mothers and fathers. So absolutely, the Prime Minister welcomed the Egyptian president's remarks on peace. And that framework, which may convince the Palestinians at long last to drive 15 or 20 minutes to Jerusalem. The Prime Minister even offered to go to Ramallah to sit with President Abbas. Hopefully that regional framework can convince the Palestinians finally, at long last, to accept Israel and move forward with the peace process.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Keys. David Keys is the Israeli Prime Minister's spokesman, joining us there live from Jerusalem.